Well, thank you for coming to our October Lunch and Learn. The title of this one is Fake News, Lies, and Propaganda, How to Sort Fact from Fiction and Improve Your Media Literacy. So thank you for coming. As you know, the Canton Community Foundation does monthly meetings where we'll bring in interesting people talking about interesting things that they're doing. And so I want to welcome, we've got one mic, so that's why I'm leaning over. But thank you for coming. Now that you've RSVP'd for this event, you'll be on our list. So each month we'll send you information about our next speakers. So for example, next month in November, we'll be talking about long COVID, and there'll be a doctor from Trinity Health COVID department will be coming and speaking to us about that. Also, we're in a new room, so thank you for that. Normally we're in the boardroom, so it's an intimate setting. These lunch and learns are designed for us to be interactive, ask questions as you go along. As Angie's talking, if you have questions, raise your hand. They're small, they're intimate, they're informal, and so we want to be sure we answer all your questions. So without further ado,
All right.
let me introduce Angie. Angie Early is a former high school and middle school teacher who now helps college students find information on a wide range of topics as the learning librarian at the University of Michigan Library. She's written extensively on library instruction on a wide range of publications and has served in leadership positions on many national library associations and committees. She's currently an adjunct lecturer for the U of M's School of Information and LSA. She's written 2 children's books about statistics and the ethics of data use, and her most recent book was published this last spring. She's currently teaching a class at U of M entitled Fake News, Lies, and Propaganda, How to Sort Fact from Fiction, and that's the name of today's talk. So please help me welcome Angie Early to our October Lunch and Learn.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to the Canton Community Foundation and Local Impact Alliance for having me here today. I appreciate the opportunity to have conversation with all of you in terms of this topic. I'm passionate about critically thinking about information, and so I really look forward to the conversation that we can have today. So that's who I am. My pronouns are she, her, and that's it. I teach a class about this, and so, I might introduce you to some new tools or things that might help you sort of think through some of this stuff, but I say I teach these classes, but I often learn more than I'm teaching as we go as well. So I'm looking forward to learning from all of you as well. So please let me know if you have questions as we go, because my goal here is to think about, much like I do with the class, thinking about developing our critical thinking skills, thinking about creating our own personal strategy of how we're going to be evaluating the news. I'm not here to think about things like what is fake news, right? There are so many different definitions of what fake news is. I hear this from students all the time. It's completely fabricated news. It's misinformation, disinformation. We talk about what those definitions are. Some people define it even as things that they just disagree with and they don't like the way it's being said, and that's fake news. Those are issues, don't get me wrong, I understand that, but I am more taking a step back and thinking about, okay, no matter how you define what fake news is, how are you going to evaluate and critically think about those things, okay? How are you going to think about what you're hearing, what you're seeing, what you're listening to, and what you're reading, and however you engage with the news. My advice to you is to think about looking closely at what we've got, at what you've got, thinking critically, reading widely, and sharing any information that you have carefully, okay? So I could just go through a few things in terms of starting out here. Can you hear me okay online? Because I'm getting chats that they can't hear me okay online. Okay. Y'all can hear me okay here.
Yes.
This is good.
And you're not muted.
Well, I mean, I might be, but this camera should, although, I don't know. If I unmute, we're going to get an echo. Can everyone hear me okay? See?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, so just turn your volume down. Yeah, we'll go.
Yeah.
Oh, she can now.
Okay, great. All right. That's never a good idea to not be able to. Okay. Awesome. So here we are, talking about fake news and thinking critically about these materials. So I'd like to start with an example about looking closely. If you are following along, I'm on slide 16 at this point, and I have an image here of two elephants, okay? And it's from a news story that says, 14 elephants get drunk on corn wine and pass out in a tea plantation, okay? And when we look closely at what we have here, we might, it can help, because sometimes when I say look closely and think critically and read widely, people say, oh, that's all the same thing. Well, it's actually, it can be very discrete things. Like when we think about looking closely, in what circumstances are we looking closely? In what situations are we looking closely? This is something that came through on many people's social media feeds early in the pandemic. And if you follow this link, you'll find that this is supposedly a picture about elephants on a tea plantation. Because we were all in lockdown, the elephants could roam free, and and they just imbibed too much, right? And so we have this. So what are our first? I'd love to hear from you all. What are some first thoughts when you see something like this?
I thought they might be dead.
Okay, exactly, right? Exactly. It looks, there could be so many different things. So one person in the room said, I thought they might be dead. They're laying on the ground, right? Yeah. I mean, maybe you could read this and say, some people might read this and say, oh, does COVID affect other animals as well? And if you just looked at this, because it was really viral in terms of early in the pandemic and was kind of a component of that. So that's an awesome observation. Any other sort of initial reactions to this picture, whether somebody says, online if they've noticed something, or folks here? They're cute. Don't we love that, right? I did a fake news session this summer with a bunch of high schoolers, and they were all like, but why isn't there more cute things on the news, right? Like, we're drawn to those things, right? They are awfully cute. They're almost shaped in like a heart, the top of a heart shape, aren't they? Yeah, they're adorable. Love to think about elephants sort of stumbling around, right? After they have overindulged. They're cute. And there's something about that emotional connection when we see something that draws us in that way, right? I mean, you can probably guess that this isn't true, right? Like that this didn't happen. I like to start with these kinds of examples just to show you that there's a whole range of things that you can see online. This is actually, somebody took an image from an artist who likes to, maybe you've even seen these kinds of things. There used to be an artist who loved Weimaraners, and he used to make children's books about them and big posters and pose them with like hats on and things like this. Person does the same kind of things with elephants, And so they took a picture from something else and then made up a story together. And so when I say look closely, what I'm saying is look closely probably at the image, at the language, at your own reactions to what you see. I have this, I just talked with her last night, this great librarian friend who talks about adding friction to the process, slowing down, saying, oh, this is my initial response. Why am I feeling this way, right? What is it that's making me feel this way? So when we're looking or reading, we're thinking about the text, the images, just everything that has to do with what we see here, and it does require us to add that friction, right? It might take more time to engage with the news, to pause in those kinds of ways. Thinking about the images that accompany the news. There could be some very common writing conventions. In my fake news class, students talk about punctuation way more than you think they might, right? Because it's such an important component to things like headlines. So I'd love to hear from you, like, what are some of those common writing or image conventions that sort of change the way we interpret the news? What are some things that you all can think of, or people online as well, that are the, oh, this is designed to not just state what's happening, but also initiate, some people call it clickbait, right, to get us in. But what are some things that you, the different kinds of adjectives, right? So instead of just saying so-and-so said, they'll say so-and-so angrily, that's an adverb, I guess. That's, but in the same kind of situation, right? They're making an interpretation of what's happening, and it's hard to get in someone's head. Like, you know, you're making some assumptions about how they're saying or why they're saying. But some of the adjectives, we talk about things like intensifying language. So adjectives, but also words like all, never, like these sort of complete conclusions where there's no room for thinking anything else but what's that. So what are some other components there when we think about either the common writing conventions or image conventions that we might see, meaning like, what do we see? Rankings, when people are trying to make something. So we love the BuzzFeed polls, don't get me wrong, right? What Disney princess am I, right? And so thinking about that, but then they are harvesting your personal data when you answer all of these questions about what Disney princess you are. So be careful about who you're giving your information to. But also, we were talking a little bit before the session started about things like statistics literacy, data literacy. What are those rankings placed on, right? I'll use the common thing of 4 of 5 dentists recommend, right? Well, did they only ask 5 dentists, right? Like, you know, thinking about those things. When, you know, that ranking it's a piece of how are they using statistics and data to make a case for something, right? And what makes something a number one to one person is maybe not the same thing as what makes something to another person. What are some of the other things that you see online that have to do with either the pictures you see or the characteristics of clickbait?
Sensationalistic or titillating. If it's like lurid or
Okay.
or
Scandalous.
yeah, scandalous. And they like to, especially with clickbait, it seems like they like to lure you in with
Okay.
something that's scandalous about a celebrity, or even, it doesn't even have to be a celebrity, it just be a wild story.
Yeah. So a person in the room is talking about the sort of lurid nature of the news, right? In ways to draw people in. In the news lingo, they like to say, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Like, is that what you were going to say, right? Right, if it bleeds, it leads. Is there something that we can make this story feel very like action-packed or connect with us in this very sort of, well, somebody said the word scandalous in the room, right?
That's
thinking
been
about
around
that.
for decades,
And that,
so-
it's been around for longer than that, actually. We can go back to the Middle Ages and look at things like, and this is a tough topic, but thinking about like where the idea of blood libel came from. Things like that, where people used people's fears and insecurities and sort of hunger for, like, I mean, soap operas used to be really, really popular, right? And so it's using that entertainment value as well.
Fear is a big
Yeah.
Fear is a big marker of that because, I mean, just trying to lure you in because creating a sense of fear of something. I mean, I get it with talking to my mom all the time
Oh.
about news or stuff that she's heard or seen, or
Yeah.
it's just like, Mom, you just try to say, Mom, they're just trying to wake you up, they're trying to get you in fear, they're trying to get you.
Yeah, so someone was in the room for our folks online, they were thinking about things like how fear and insecurity are used to manipulate people and to incite sort of these feelings. That's when we talk in academia so many times, we talk about the different nature of information and the different producers of information and what is their purpose, right? Is it to sell ads? Is it to harvest your personal data? Is it to, we'd like to think in the academy that it's about like furthering research. Some people want to do, experiments and have lab studies in order to learn more. And really, even really well-respected news organizations, they have to make money in order to stay in business. But how are they doing that, right? How are they bringing people in for those things? And that can be, you're not alone in terms of, you were talking about personal relationships and how that's affected personal relationships. I encourage you to look anywhere, search anywhere on the open web with terms like parents and QAnon or parents and conspiracy theories. There's a great article in the Washington Post where they interviewed several different people. There's an article called "I Miss My Mom" because of, sort of what these things have happened.
I was saying to her this weekend,
Yeah.
do we want to argue or do we want to have a pleasant conversation? I mean, we can have a pleasant conversation and we don't need to argue because we're going to disagree.
Yeah. And figuring out, those boundaries, right, of what we're going to talk about. That is, again, in the class, one of the common things is that students want to talk about sort of how do I engage with other folks that are in this way. But online, I'm seeing things like, extreme titles on YouTube. They make caricature-like images of people. So they take the most unflattering picture of a particular political figure. And this happens on it does not matter what your political beliefs are. I'm just here to say, right? Like, this is not just one part of the political spectrum that is using this kind of thing. And I'm so, that energy I just heard back from you all, I really appreciated hearing that because I really, I want to make sure that people understand that this is happening in so many different arenas. But yes, that unflattering images, thank you so much. Let me see, Shauna Kay for putting that in the chat. Okay, so unflattering images or angry images or something that, like, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Like, it does convey that. It uses what you are bringing to the conversation. It doesn't attach words to it and define it through someone's interpretation of their own words. It says, oh, here is an image that most people think is unflattering, and then in their own invisible thinking, they're going to have this gut response. So again, the looking closely means adding more time, slowing down, and examining your own response to the news, right? And thinking about these things. You mentioned, some people have been mentioning the different language that's been used when I was asking about like sort of writing conventions. And I'm on slide 19 right now in case you're following along. So there's this great website that talks about the 16 types of media bias, okay? And it's talking about things like, are they using unsubstantiated claims? And it gives you examples from across the news media spectrum in terms of perspectives of how sensationalism and emotionalism is used in the news. How if you don't actually attribute, like say where you got your information from, and then it'll give you an example. And it doesn't just use information from, like I said, a particular part of the media spectrum. So I really encourage you to follow this link and look at some of these examples. We talked about word choice when we talk about adjectives, right? We talk about this photo bias, what is being covered in the news overall, right? But my students love to talk about capitalization, like in the headline, they've capitalized this one really angry word, right? And it's like, oh, and who knew when we were learning in elementary school about like sentence structure, how much we have sort of absorbed that. And if we can slow down a little bit and sort of be self-aware enough to realize that that's what's happening, that can be helpful in terms of thinking this through. Because if you have emotional responses to the news all the time, that might be a hint to yourself that something's going on. And and when I use that very vague term of emotional responses for a reason, because if you are gleeful every time that you read the news or angry every time that you read the news, there's something going on there, okay? You're not just learning about what's going on, and I don't want to take away that experience if that's something you enjoy, you know, whatever that piece is, but if that's your response most of the time, again, taking a step back and saying, why are you responding that way? Because really, thinking about looking closely at our own responses to the news can be very powerful in terms of thinking about how we engage with this topic. So I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit. We talked about looking closely, and so much of this has to do with thinking critically about what we're seeing, okay? So how many of you have heard about XBB? Okay, I'm on slide 23. XBB. Okay, Michael said you have not heard about this. Okay. XBB is actually a new variant of Omicron, of the COVID virus, okay? And it's being found in particular parts of the world right now. I bet now you're starting to think, oh, there have been other sort of circumstances like this too, right? So what happens when we start seeing a new news story? I just read about this morning and added it to the slides, okay? We start trying to categorize it, right? How does this fit in with my previous information when I learned about where the COVID virus came from? Because yes, XBB is being found mostly in countries in Asia, okay? So there's a comparison. We're fitting that into the files of our brain, trying to make sense of what we see, right? And I've had 2.5 years of COVID experience now. Where does this fit into my piece? And again, taking that step back and saying, okay, you know, there's fear involved. We've all gone through a traumatic experience together. So what do I need to know about this story, and how do I take a step back and sort of think this through, okay? I want you to be active consumers of information, right? Yes. Spend more time with the news, like I've mentioned before, when we're talking about thinking critically and looking closer. That might mean, okay, I've just gotten this article or seen a social media post about something called XBB. The thing I saw, a friend in Iowa on a social media post put XBB and then the crying emoji. That's how I learned about XBB, okay? And I gotta say to myself, what does that mean? Take a step back. Emojis very much is a tiding. That's emotion is part of the name, right? And so it's very much tying to my emotions. I need to be an active consumer of the information. I can keep my social media feed up on my phone, but opening another browser tab, looking beyond the site that I'm on, because it can be on a news, like you could be part of the AP News, maybe you get the Google News feed, things like that. Getting off that, opening a new browser, putting in things like XBB criticism, XBB, what is XBB? You know, being more of, this is called lateral reading. Getting off the page you're on, not just trusting the about page of what you are on, getting off that page and doing constructive searching somewhere else. This is what reporters do. This is what they're trained on doing. This is what historians do. And there's been some research out of Stanford that shows that it's one of the most effective ways of thinking critically, fact-checking, is to get out of the circumstance that you're in, slow down, and search beyond the first page, put new terms in, look for other information about this, because it could possibly confirm what you're seeing as well as sort of give you different perspectives about this. So thinking critically is beyond the invisible piece, but also taking action and looking somewhere else for that information. So actively searching. Maybe you have to put in opposite search terms of what you see in front of you. And actually, I don't want you to be in any harmful places on the internet, but there are places that show different perspectives than perhaps you have your own experience with. Asking, why am I worried about this? Developing that questioning mindset, and it takes practice in doing that. Again, examining your own response to the news. And then my second bullet point, which is the thing that people struggle with a lot. You're not alone if you feel this way. I know this morning I was like, oh my gosh, another thing, right? Another thing. I just got my valve and booster, right? Like I've got this whole other thing going on. Sometimes we don't know, folks. We don't know what's happening in the world. And it is in an age when I can easily Google the Tigers or baseball score and find out when my favorite show is playing and, get tickets online. I learn instantly that Blink-182 is back in business. This thing about when news happens and we don't know right away is that's when the fear can start coming in. In fact, if somebody is so certain about something in those moments, that it might even be a red flag, right? Because we don't know the whole context. Things are usually more complicated than just A plus B equals C, okay? That's tough to hear, right? It's tough to hear. And sometimes we have to make decisions when we don't know, right? We don't have that 100% conclusion. You do the best that you can, okay? But those are difficult things. So critical thinking, yes, it does involve reasoning and evidence and logic and all of those things. But it also says, I don't know is a valid response to some of this stuff, okay? All right, I'm gonna pause for a minute, all right? Before we go into read widely and share carefully. We are at 12:05, we're about halfway in. Thoughts about what we've talked about so far, because I think those are the two most common things. Or maybe besides read widely and share carefully, what are some other things that you all in this room or online have used? I'd love to learn from you all about different structures or strategies that you think are helpful. Or, we can maybe share a circumstance and then try to figure out what we want to do in those circumstances. But other thoughts about strategies? Yes.
I think it's helped me to think critically about things I agree with.
Okay.
I'm good at thinking critically when I disagree.
Oh, yeah.
Instantly my antenna goes up.
Right.
I bring up the other sites and look
Yeah.
for confirmation.
Yeah.
Or look for countering opinions.
Right.
But it is easy to share something that I agree with
Yes.
and then get egg in my face
Oh.
because people say, well, that's not reliable.
Yeah.
It's one thing if they say that's not reliable because they disagree with the source, but if they then point out the facts that
Yeah.
counter what I just posted, then I look stupid.
Yeah.
And I think it's helpful to be more vigilant when you agree with it, or when it supports your political position or your
Yeah.
frame of looking at things.
Yeah. For our folks online, just to repeat, summarize, hopefully, and you can tell me whether I'm summarizing this fairly, that sometimes we can easily recognize the stuff we disagree with or have that gut reaction to or have those falsehoods. But sometimes when we have that agreeing moment, pausing and thinking that through or not sharing it automatically can be more challenging. This is very true. Many people feel that way. That sort of, again, self-awareness, that piece of like, okay, am I going to be, how much have I questioned of the mindset of what I see here and sort of taking that step back. Very much there have been circumstances like that. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just thinking point, counterpoint.
Okay.
Is it the value for us to, even though my car's more honest, if you're using some news feeds that are blue leaning, to also listen to some news feeds that are red leaning? It's just going to cause more consternation.
Well, you gotta, it's an individual thing, right? We are, and I'm gonna talk about this later on and sort of talking about news breaks, because sometimes it is hard, right? Sometimes it really is hard. my next thing is reading widely, and it gets into some of what you're talking about, right? Is that like, okay, if we think about, and even if we have time, like I have some sort of tools that people have used to try to like identify the audience of different media outlets and the bias of different media outlets. Because sometimes people are like, well, I would know what to follow, right? Well, I'm not saying follow the extremes on the line of things. You don't, there are news organizations out there that are completely fabricating things, and they're being taken to court and being held accountable. Not everybody, but some of the big folks are. And hopefully this takes time, but hopefully that will be addressed. But there are other situations that aren't on the extreme ends that can help you with that. And when we're in the age where we don't have to be in front of a television and just get the news at 6 and 6:30, or even headline news, right, where we got a news story every half hour. When we are in a situation where the news is coming to us by the thing in our pocket, you can make those choices pretty easily. The technology allows you to make those choices and then have that come to you and decide. I will tell you, I know I, of course, you can obviously tell I'm very interested in this stuff. So when a major news event happens, I do watch it on multiple platforms. And it is when you do something like that, it is interesting to see those different perspectives and to learn from that. Sometimes there are more commonalities than you think there would be, okay? And it's only in the rehashing and the reinterpretation, because again, there's that ambiguity at the beginning and nobody knows what's going on. And then there's the rehashing and the interpretation and the opinion and the editorializing of what the event means, where that interpretation comes in these things. But if that is one strategy that I actually recommend a lot to my students, and they do appreciate those things. And the Canton Public Library actually has, and I've got a link in the slides, to a whole page where they have all of their different news sources that you can subscribe to for free, okay? So that you're not, because it can be frustrating in your news feed to say, oh, I'm getting the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit News, but I click and then I got to pay for the article. Because I'm actually telling you, like, don't just rely on the headline. Look closely, read the whole thing through. But, if you can get some of these other things through it's just my little, plug for your local public library. But, and I have a link for that. But it will also tell you, it can be close when it's the thing you agree with, and it can be hard to recognize the gaps in the story. Oh, they're talking about, this article is about school choice, okay? Some people call it charter schools. Some people call it something else, right? Yeah. And then you see the different perspectives and you realize in one situation, they're not considering this entire aspect of the issue. And in this situation, they are, but they didn't consider what the other piece of it together. And so what happens in those circumstances is you're not turning your thinking over to that reporter, to that news publication. You are saying, you are constructing meaning of what that is. And that is much more empowering than letting someone else do the thinking for you and saying, this is how you should feel about the issue. If you can identify those things and feel comfortable doing those things.
Shauna Kay said something online. She said we need to be mindful of the speaker or the writer's positionality and how they may impact what they say.
Okay.
Similar to what.
Okay. And because that's on chat, I'm not going to repeat that, because our online folks will have heard that. But again, being an active consumer of the news, opening a new tab. Who is Joe Angela Early? You should be doing that. I mean, who is this lady up here telling you about how to do these things, right? Reading Wikipedia articles. I read Wikipedia every day. It's a start, right? Who are these people? Who have they written for before? Do they have a blog? Do they have a social media feed? What are they posting about? And you'll start, I mean, people do have reputations, but also, I'm sure you can think of certain people that have had different opinions over time, or their thinking has evolved about a particular issue. And so it's hard. We have this early, sort of experience with a particular writer, and then they might have changed in their perspective, but we're hanging on to that earlier thing. Even organizations, news organizations, the Washington Post's perspectives have changed over time in terms of how our editorial board has put forward different things, but that is one of the other things. David, what else?
I was just going to ask you so you're reading widely,
Mm-hmm.
you're looking broadly beyond your own browser. What are the tools that you have to critically find the right sources so you don't find the extremes on both
Okay.
sides? Because there's a lot of unknown. I
Right.
don't know if they're slanted or not
Right.
on whatever side.
Right.
How can I approach that reading widely with some skills?
I mean, I would open up a third tab and say, is such and such a conservative news source, and see what other people are saying about that. Reading other articles on that too. You all are bringing, so the question was, how do I know when a news source that I'm reading is, like, how do I find another one? What kind of tools do we have? And I actually have some things that we're going to talk about with that as well. That can help bring that to you. Because again, I appreciate that this stuff takes time and we all have these busy lives. I actually often use this idea of how the news media has become more democratized as well, right? We're all news producers now, right? Meteor lands in the Detroit Free Press. It starts at, I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, but there was like a piece of an asteroid that landed in Southeast Michigan. And the Free Press started posting on social, send us your porch cams of this thing. And we were the reporters of this, right? But as, Stanley says, with great, power comes great responsibility, right? In terms of thinking, well, now I got to work a little harder because there is so much other news out there, and it's hard to define those different perspectives. So, yeah.
I think on one of your charts it said, "Learn to live with ambiguity."
Ambiguity, yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like the last 10 years at least, that's all we've been doing.
Yeah.
Every life is ambiguous. it seems like
Yeah.
these days. I remember as a kid seeing my first computer,
Yeah.
in a room back in the 1970s, and being mesmerized by like how data is so exact. And I felt like as we went from the industrial age to the information age, I guess is what
Yeah,
we're in
sure.
now, that things would just be so much more clear
Yeah.
because computers would allow you
Yeah.
to know the truth.
Yeah.
But I think it's gotten further from that.
Yes, further from that. Yeah, I mean, so my degree is in information science, okay? And so I think it is a bit simplistic to think, well, just more information out there is going to clear this up. I mean, we've never had more access to information than we have right now, right? And even if we were talking about the print version of the New York Times, it's so much bigger than it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or 100 years ago. And we're talking about human beings. If it was just that information fixed it, we'd all be living in the Matrix and Keanu Reeves and having something plugged in and now I know Mandarin, right? Like, it's not like that, right? We're talking about, not yet at least, yes. We're talking about human emotion. We're talking about people's backgrounds and their lived experience, and that influences how we think about what's going on in the world. Because my class is not about like sort of read these 3 things and you'll know, right? It's about how am I going to figure out what's going on in the world? Because I can't be a climate scientist and a public health expert and a lawyer and all of those. Like, at some point I'm going to have to trust somebody else, and so how am I going to do that, right? And when am I going to be in those situations?
When I do it, I try to think, what do I want this story to be? And then how far off is it from what I want it to be? And try to poke holes into it.
Yeah.
And because if it's really what I want it to be, and it is,
Yeah.
then like, all right, I can get to it, but that rarely happens.
Yeah. So, examining what you want the story to be and then how that fits. And if you're only reading stuff about and it's always confirming that's
Right.
probably another component of those things. So, yes, being mindful, yes. Okay, so here we go. All right, so one of the things we've been talking about is like where you can get your news. And so in the slides, I can hand this out as you leave in terms of this activity, but I am going to recommend, as one of our folks here in the room has said, thinking about, okay, getting your news from more than one source. Considering looking at news in which you're going to disagree with what the conclusions are. Do that in a safe way. I appreciate that can be difficult to do sometimes, but there are a lot of ways. So I'm on slide 30 right now, and it's the one where we asked U of M students where they get their news from. And it's all over the map, folks. And we even put an I Love Mom bumper sticker on it because so many students were like, my mom sends me links all the time, right? And so, even from your mom, even from text messages from each other, social media is mentioned, but also some pretty conventional news sources. And I get this every time. I also invite reporters to the class, which can be really powerful. And so, so there is that. Yeah, Twitter, Shauna K. Some people are really tied to Twitter. I could not believe in the class. We talked about Elon Musk a lot last winter, what's going on with Twitter? And then other people are like, oh, I'm done with social media. I get my news one time at this time, and then I don't get, and then I get alerts from different news sources. So it's a lot of different places. We have more options than we ever have had about that. So I would encourage you to make some of those choices, right? And thinking about following social media on social media feeds, some folks that you maybe aren't right now. Reading different sources through your public library, which I have listed on the slides. Thinking about something like the Google News feed or AP News feed, something like that, where it's coming to you, maybe some different perspectives in that way. There's flip chart, there's a lot of different tools with that. And in the slides, I have a link to that page from the Canton Public Library and their news sources there. I'm also going to recommend something called allsides.com, okay? Allsides is something that you can follow on social media. And I know the word sides, that's actually when we were talking about word choice and things like that, the connotations of words are always evolving, but there's, certainly some of that, they started doing this work before some of the rhetoric around there being sides to things began. But what allsides.com does is they take a common news story and they've done this both crowdsourced and a little more of an analytical sort of thing. It's actually where I got the 16 types of media bias stuff that I was talking about before. And they've identified much to what David's question was, some center thinking news organizations and media outlets, something that are more left and more right. And they take the same news story and they show you the reporting from all of those things. So instead of you having to go out and find it on your own, you are trusting how this site does these things. It does come to you, and you might have a little more control over how you're seeing. And they try to stay pretty sharp. The one this morning, they had analyses. Joe Biden was recently on CNN, and analyses of those interviews. And it was very striking to see even the differences in the headlines. So this is something we do in the class where we take one story and we look at all three and we kind of talk together. What are the differences? How do I know the gaps, right, between these different stories?
It's funny how, I was just reading stuff on his appearance on CNN.
Yeah.
It's funny how people change in their opinion
Yeah.
of news sources because all my liberal friends now we're not happy with that interview. We're not happy with Jake Tapper.
And that was on CNN, yeah.
We're suspicious of Jake Tapper.
Yeah.
And I always looked at him, and I know people change.
Yeah.
But I always looked at him as a respectable news source. Not
Right.
always gonna agree with him, not always
Right.
gonna disagree with him somewhere, but, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting,
We're talking about personality, we're talking about celebrity in some cases. I mean, there are fake news about celebrity and reputations and things like that.
news anchors stoke their celebrity.
Yes.
I mean, Jake appearing on, night shows and.
Yes.
Because he wants to build up that.
Selling his book.
Selling his book. I have a book I'm selling. I mentioned mine. Like, it's just,
Are there
know.
links to that?
No, it's not about fake news, it's about teaching, but still.
And CNN is changing how they approach news.
Yeah.
They've got a new show leader that.
Yes, they've changed their anchors. Yeah,
So they want to change how they're, but yeah, it's interesting. It's,
yeah. It can turn on a dime, folks, right? We do the technology that we have. Again, it's this amazing thing. So I don't know if you remember from the Boston Marathon situation from a couple of years ago. And the awful thing that happened during the Boston Marathon, and there was a bomb, and they were, we didn't know what was happening in the moment of the Boston Marathon. And then afterwards, they were looking for some people. And we couldn't even rely on regular news. Like, social media is what helped them find those people, right? Social media is what helps people find, like in the Arab Spring from a couple of years ago. Social media is what's happening in Russia and the Ukraine right now. Like, you can be dismissive of Facebook all you want. There is a huge impact of that. And it's a more complicated thing than saying, oh, do I have a moral, because we talk about having like sort of following our own ethics, and do I have a moral responsibility to leave Facebook because they've sold all my data to Cambridge Analytica, and now it's used to influence different elections and things like that. But it can be used for good, and it can destroy a person's reputation like that, and trying to make our way through that and saying, okay, I'm not going to draw a conclusion. Right? I'm going to try to say I don't know right now and think I'm going to be okay with the ambiguity, or how am I going to move forward? But it's a kind of amazing. And this all gets us back to allsides.com, which is you can see that story sort of play out in
Tell us
those.
who they are. Who is allsides.com?
So it's an organization. That's what they're called, is allsides.com. They have an editorial group. They are very transparent in the on their website. You can look at how they come to the conclusions they do about how they fact check, what their editorial philosophy is. If it is hard for you to find the editorial philosophy, or you go to an About Us page and there is very vague wording about how, that should be a red flag, that should be friction time, it should be time to start to look. And so they do these different things to sort of be transparent about how they come to the conclusions. But it's as far as I know right now, not owned by anywhere else. Like, it's more of a group together. That may change, but it is that. So, but you're asking the right questions, David, right? Like, who are these people? I love this. Okay, so reading widely is important. And then as we're kind of closing up, don't forget to, if you're not doing these three other things, please try to not share, right? Just take a moment, think more critically, read more closely, kind of read other options before, examine your own response to the news. How am I love this headline, they're shouting at me, I'm shouting back, and I'm gonna shout to the world and share it more broadly, right? So thinking about how sharing information online should require us to read closely, think critically, and read widely, because the spread of fake news is destructive and divisive, okay? And in a lot of cases, that's the goal. Some people are like, and that's one of the things that I do struggle with. It can be hard to know the intention of people who are creating this stuff.
Especially foreign actors.
Right, I mean, people may be just doing this just to make money. They don't care what side that you're on. Or it could be,
Dismantle the political system.
some things like,
United States.
yeah, I mean, it's designed to be divisive in order to do that, right? I don't care what side I'm going to take on the political, on the election or whatever. I am doing this just to create wedges between people so that we can't come together to constructively solve problems, to address public health issues, to think about how am I going to help the folks in Hurricane Ian, all of those things, because much like what is happening in other circumstances, in other part of our lives, yes, there are systemic issues. Technology has a responsibility, the tech companies have a responsibility. There are big actors in this, but I hope that you can also feel your own agency in determining what the fake news problem is going to be like in your own life, and think about what you can do and to address this. And one of the things that you can do is be very careful about what you're sharing online. Don't be part of the problem, right? In doing that. So if you haven't read a news article all the way through or thought about it critically, just don't share it. It'll be fine, but somebody will see it somewhere else. If you don't share it, it's not going to stop the world, right? Or talk about it or whatever. And if you need to take a step back, it's okay to take a news break, because the world, there's a lot going on in the world right now, okay? All right, thank you so much. I know we've been talking and asking questions all along, so I hope you didn't feel like I was just talking the whole time, that we've got that. Oh, but I think it's much more useful when we all sort of kind of work our way through this, but we have a couple of minutes, but I'm happy to. Yeah.
I actually get the newspaper.
Oh, I do too. I'm like, I need to support the news agencies, yeah.
And while I do so, I usually have a device next to me, so it's either my phone or iPad or both. And I'm sitting there, I'm looking at a bunch of sites to get information. Well, one of the common sites that comes up is Wikipedia.
Yeah, absolutely,
So,
yeah.
Wikipedia, I think everybody knows, it's a compilation of a lot of contributors.
Yes.
And so, what do we trust there?
I know. I mean, there's a lot of criticism with Wikipedia. When you look at Wikipedia entries, actually, some of the criticism have to do with things like who is represented in Wikipedia. Do they have news stories from a lot of different places, or are they covering, but they've actually done a lot of work to improve the process of editing Wikipedia, to bring more diverse voices to that. I would say if Wikipedia was your only place for information, that's a problem. But I also think it is something that is written at a reading level that many of us can engage with, and it can be a starting point, okay? I look at Wikipedia almost every day. I'm a librarian. I have a degree in information science. I don't stop there, but sometimes I just don't know what something means. And so it can give me a start, but you just, again, reading widely, if that's not your only piece, but people rely on Wikipedia, so I don't know, it's a tough situation.
There's the time element.
Yeah.
How much time?
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, it's half hour most.
Yeah. So we have to make those decisions, right? So, and so many times, it is driven by what's happening in our personal lives, right? I'm a parent and I'm about to send my kid to school. Now I'm more interested in education issues, right? I'm retired. What's going on with the stock market in my 401k? Oh, it's being influenced by world events in oil producing countries. Now I'm interested in those things. So I get those things. We also, again, it's not good for our mental health to be always bombarded by lots of things. So I'm not saying one or the other, but it's a time factor. And I just had, I wish there was just one way, like a tech way, a browser add-on or whatever that said boom. And there are lots of things that are, lots of really good people that are trying to account for that and work towards issues around that. But we're also talking again about human behavior, and it takes time for us to think through those things. So finding your middle way and the thing that you feel comfortable with, that's what I would recommend for that. Other thoughts?
How do we handle people that we know they're being divisive?
Okay.
Whether we follow them or not, we know they're pushing an agenda.
Okay.
And we find ourselves forwarding that agenda.
Okay.
Going down that rabbit hole.
Uh-huh.
what are some skills to keep from doing that if we know we're doing that?
What do you guys
We
suggest?
see some people nodding?
Well,
I
like
would
your
love-
comment about being slow to post things.
Okay.
I think it's good to be slow to comment.
Oh, slow to
And-
comment.
and
That's
to
another
be-
thing. Yeah.
Especially on social media, and to be gracious in your comments. I like people I find on social media that can treat the people that disagree with them, and sometimes in the meanest of ways.
Right.
But still can respond
Yeah,
graciously.
yeah.
And can still, because you don't see it, like the whole Dearborn library. thing.
Oh, I know.
And,
Yes.
They had people standing up at that meeting, I guess last night, begging people to listen to each other.
Yeah,
be
to listen to
gracious,
each other.
and,
Yeah.
And we don't have to fight each other. We don't have to
Right,
be
right.
our neighbor's enemies.
Yeah. So what is the
Exactly.
dialogue and the rhetoric, and where are you going to participate in it, right? What is your piece of that? Whether it's commenting at all, whether it's giving click points to a thing every time something is fed through your social media and fed, like they keep track, there's revenue generated from that. I understand if you want to be a keyboard warrior, I get it. But you know, you got to, and you also had to make choices about who you're going to engage with, right? Like when it's your mom, you're going to try to figure out a way, right? If it's a stranger on the internet, I encourage you to make some good choices there. About, you know, I want you to make friends all over the world. Don't get me wrong. I love that about social media, right?
And it's worse when I become less than gracious with my mom.
Oh, that's
what I-
right.
you just wanna say- just wanna say, I can remember before the 2016 elections, we were getting in an argument, and I said, Mom, you're just gonna have to put up with it. She's gonna be the president of the United
And then
States.
that didn't.
I came home and then the election going,
Oh
"Oh,
no. Well, and so, and we got to take the long view. The 2016 election was not, even in most recent election years, a contentious election. I mean, we have forgotten the 2000 election and everything. I mean, everything that's happened with that. So, not losing the long view. Sometimes we get in that micro thing and we forget about all of those other things. But yeah.
I switched to sports.
I mean, sometimes I actually think.
Around here,
Watching
that's
Sports
dangerous.
Center instead
I am telling you, I love to hear that. I have switched to sports too, and I was not a sports fan, but I was just like, I turned it into a soap opera. It's the Pistons of a city in the Midwest called the Detroit, from Detroit. It's the Bills of Buffalo against the Chiefs of, I turn it into a story. And I actually think ESPN has allowed us to do that as well, or these media outlets. I mean, it's a narrative. They've turned it into that, but yeah. And Shauna came to respond to people's stuff about references. Or Wikipedia talks about how there are other things that they link to in Wikipedia that can be really helpful. So as a starting point for that. They also, there's going to be much, when TikTok was blowing up, there was much more on Wikipedia about what that was than there was in maybe more traditional media. So new and fresh things, like when they were shooting at that asteroid recently, there are some places that's the only place you're going to find this stuff because it takes time and energy and people and staffing to be able to put a story together that is about those things. So just reading it with a grain of salt. But yeah, sometimes you just have to turn on fun dance videos, like Encanto. Yes, kitty.
Elephants lying down.
Elephants lying down. Well, you all have been wonderful. Thank you so much. I don't have anything else, but I'm happy to. Yes, thank you. All right.
And just a reminder, we will have another Lunch and Learn in November, and it will be across town at our building, the Canton Community Foundation building. There's a first floor conference room. So if you'd like to join us, it will be, and it is November 9th, Wednesday, November 9th, so the day after the election. So
Oh boy.
Yeah, so that
I'm
should be
I do a lot of these things around election time, go to public libraries and things like that and talk about that, which I did in the Ypsilanti Public Library the last election. All right, I handed out, we were gonna do this activity where we compare some of these charts of this is where you should get your news and this is the thing. I mean, I think that's a good starting point for figuring out the political spectrum, but I would not rely just on those things. Like it can introduce you to new media things, but it's also someone's conclusion of that. And it's not on the micro level. You know, there can be news outlets that have one or two reporters that do represent a very different perspective. And if you're painting the whole news organization with that brush, you know, you have to be careful with those things. But gosh, you guys have been great. Thank you so much for like being so engaged. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah.